Thanks for listening to the Nice Podcast. I am available to deliver keynote presentations and workshops for your company or for your conference. Reach out to me, davedelaney.speaks.com, or email me and we can talk. Now on with the show. As a business-to-business marketer, your needs are unique. B2B buying cycles are long, and your customers face incredibly complex decisions. Isn't it time you had a marketing platform built specifically for you? LinkedIn ads empower marketers with solutions for you and your customers. LinkedIn ads allow you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful environment. On LinkedIn, you'll have direct access to and build relationships with decision makers. Of the 875 million users on the network, 180 million are senior level executives. 10 million are C-level executives. You'll also be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools built specifically for B2B, and they work. Audiences exposed to brand messages on LinkedIn are 6 times more likely to convert. LinkedIn is the social network that drives the most visits to my website from all the different articles and interactions that I do on LinkedIn. I have to tell you, LinkedIn is awesome. Make B2B marketing everything it can be and get $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/NPN. Terms and conditions apply.
I don't worry so much about what other people are going to think. It goes back to the experiences I offer. I always want to make sure that whatever I do feels true to me. That it sounds like me, that it looks like me, that it is consistent with who I see myself to be. And as long as I don't vary off of that, then I'm in good shape. And, it turns out that if you do that consistently enough, which is what I've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years, people end up thinking that you have a great quote unquote brand. But it really is just the product of my being pretty tenacious about not letting myself do what other people say I should do and really sticking true to what feels true to me.
Nice.
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 Nice. Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice with Dave Delaney.
Welcome to the Nice Podcast, all about communication, collaboration, and becoming better leaders. Today, I'm chatting with Tamsen Webster, who is part strategist, part storyteller, part English to English translator. She helps experts drive action with their ideas. And she's also a really amazing keynote speaker and the author of the brand new book, which I love, Find Your Red Thread, Make Your Big Ideas Irresistible. Tamsen, welcome to the Nice Podcast.
Hello. It is a nice podcast. Thanks, Dave. Nice to be here.
So what's the nicest thing someone has done for you recently?
Everybody's doing nice things for me with, the reviews of the book. I mean, that's kind of a nice thing that people are doing.
I think to your point, and now I'm thinking, oh gosh, I hope I've posted a review already. But it is, and that is something as an author and as an author myself, when you don't realize, or a reader doesn't realize just how valuable and how important reviews are. And same with podcasting too. I try not to shill for reviews on my podcast, even though the reviews are very important because they help feed the algorithms and tell the algorithm this, people like this. So, taking the time to leave a review is a very nice thing. And so for those listening who have read Tamsen's book, definitely leave that review. Cause that is it's like tipping without having to spend money.
That's true. Yes. And everyone's been so generous. And then I know, in a lot of cases that this requires at least leafing through the book so people have been incredibly generous. So that's what I'll say. There have been so far 45 really lovely people who have left positive reviews of the book. And that is 45 nice things. There you go. I see your single nice thing and raise it to 45.
Well played. Well played. So, and in your own career, and again, you can pause here for a moment and think about it, but who is someone that was especially nice to you in your career? It could be really early on when you were just getting started, or even at school, or up until now even.
Yeah, I would say that there's been an amazing collection of strong, powerful, generous women that have led in very much part to where I am today. And that started way back when I was still in college, and this wonderful woman named Joan Norris, who was the head of marketing at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum here in Boston, and it took me under her wing when I wanted to volunteer in the museum, and got me started in doing marketing for museums, which is what I originally wanted to do. And then, she was also instrumental in helping me find my first job after grad school. She put me in touch with my next nice woman boss, Martha Rush Mueller.
Right.
And there's this just fascinating, carry forward. And so, from Martha, there was this wonderful woman named Maya who gave me my best piece of advice ever. And I think those are the folks that really come to mind when I think about the folks who have been nice to me, and their niceness, their faith, their courage, sometimes their kind delivery of hard feedback, has definitely led me here. I wouldn't be where I am now without that beautiful string of women, and some non-women as well. But those three in particular come to mind.
That's great. And you mentioned the best piece of advice you ever received. What was that?
Well, that was from Maya, and in response, one of those kindly delivered hard pieces of advice. And the way that it came up was that she was actually passing on to me a piece of advice that she had gotten. And the context for the feedback, the critique, as it were, was that I felt like I had been maligned by a coworker, that a coworker had, misunderstood my intentions of something. And she said, you know what, Tamsen, I'm going to give you advice that someone gave to me. She said, when you have a situation where, someone thinks something of you, she said, it's not your job to decide whether they're wrong or right, or to tell them whether they're wrong or right. Your job is to decide whether or not you are okay with the fact that that person thinks that thing. If you're okay with it, like if it doesn't bother you that person thinks that way, maybe because that's not a person's opinion who you respect or whatever, she's like, then let it go. It doesn't matter. But if you actually value that person and are troubled by the fact that they're thinking that about you, then your job is to change their experience of you. Again, not to try to change their interpretations, but their experience. And that's how she summed it up. And so she said, you don't get to choose other people's interpretations of you. You only get to choose the experiences you offer. And that has been foundational, advice for me ever since she shared it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Have you applied that to some of the work you've done? Like I can think of some, but maybe you've been instrumental with TEDx in Cambridge and working with that organization. Have you applied that with TEDx at all?
Well, I think it's that kind of feedback is really, it shows up much more in those weird, sometimes political situations, not like politics, but in workplace dynamics or kind of industry feedback back and forth where, someone will come to you and say, oh, by the way, X person doesn't feel like you're speaking up enough about Y. And that's one of those times when that advice immediately comes into play where I'll say, okay, well, does it bother me that person feels that way? Certain times it has been a yes, it does. And so what am I going to do differently? I think with TEDx Cambridge, I always, the experiences you offer piece is definitely a thing that I try to put out there. And it's something that I try to embed in all the work that I do, which is making sure that the experience that I offer is as positive as it can be, that it's as reinforcing of someone's pre-existing strengths as it can be, and that it's as consonant with who I am as I can be. I don't tolerate in myself very well any gap between who I say I am and what I do. And so anytime that I get some kind of feedback from anybody, that points out a gap there, that's a thing that I immediately try to fix.
Yeah. And and just applying, I think and some of that is just about giving honest, not critical, or maybe a little critical, but honest feedback in order to help someone excel, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think One of my mantras for life is be useful, be thoughtful, be passionate, and be kind. And that be kind one is the hardest sometimes, because sometimes it's kinder not to tell someone something, and sometimes it's kinder to tell someone something.
Right.
So, and you add that to the way that my brain is wired, and it's something I've had to kind of work around, is that I'm wired to see what can get improved in myself and others and everything. And that tends to mean that I don't always appreciate or communicate, I should say. I do always appreciate, but don't always communicate like, hey, but you're starting from a really good spot here.
Yeah.
And so I learned the hard way that how to be more constructive in critique like that. And so I learned a wonderful feedback mechanism from a former colleague, and they referred to it as plus EBI, which is something I still do with my clients, TEDx and not. And the plus EBI, so the plus is for positives, and EBI stands for even better if. And the way it works is that when there's something to improve, let's say I'm reviewing someone's talk, and I'm like, oh, this, my brain is like, ooh, this is wrong, this piece is out of order, or whatever. Rather than just going, this piece is wrong, this piece is out of order, say something more like, what's the positive that is attached to that? Like, why is it a problem that piece is missing? And so I would start, for instance, from the positive. Well, the core idea of this piece is so strong. We want to make sure that there's no part of the argument that the audience doesn't hear. So let's make sure we have this piece included. And you can see like that just frames everything differently. It's also a really good check on me to make sure that I'm not just focusing on like, fix this, but that people really hear what is already strong and what's already positive about what they're doing.
That's brilliant. And I love the fact that you padded at the beginning with that enforcement, with that positive enforcement, right? With that reminder of what is going right first.
Yeah. And it's not so, and I think there's ways that people can misuse that, right? There's the critique sandwich, the feedback sandwich, like
right.
Positive, negative, positive. What I particularly like about that approach, or at least the way that I've come to use it, is that it forces you not just to say a nice thing before you say a critical thing. It's about always tying a critical thing to a strength. So they're not just separate. They're basically saying, because this thing is good, we need to make this thing better.
Right.
And I think that's a really important shift. It's a subtle one, but it's a really important one.
I read a while back, Sam Harris. Are you familiar with Sam Harris?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He's got a great book called Lying. And he basically makes the argument to not lie and to actually, and this is something he practices where he tries his best, or I guess he does it perfectly. I don't know, but like never lies.
That's impossible. That's impossible. I love the intent behind that, and it's full stop, not possible, but okay. I mean, Dan Ariely's done some amazing research on that as well. And it's like, I think there are times when, because here's the thing, here's actually my issue with that, is that you can start to do some pretty loopy ethical things in order to tell yourself you're not lying, but you actually are. And so, one of the things that I've discovered in all my random research and random explorations of things for what I call my swipe file, was discovering that there's multiple kinds of lies.
Hey, you're listening to the Nice Podcast with Dave Delaney. That's me. Visit Futureforth.com to learn how we can transform the communication at your organization. And if you need a speaker for your next online event or your in-person conference, are we doing in-person conferences yet? Soon, I hope. You can visit DaveDelaneySpeaks.com and you'll learn more about working with me there. All right, let's get back to the show.
And the kind of lying that people actually hate the most is the truth told in a misleading way. And that's known as paltering. And it's such a good word. It's basically, and we've probably all done it, where you don't say anything not true, but you know perfectly well that what you're saying could be interpreted in many different ways. So you can tell yourself that you're not lying, but the effect on the other person is the same. And by the way, when they find out that you do that, that hurts you in their eyes more than any other kind of lying.
Oh, that's interesting.
Go on.
I
mean, because it feels extra manipulative. And so, it's not that I'm saying, hey, it's okay to lie. I just think that, that's where I come back to the be kind. The be useful, be kind is an important bracketing on that for me, because it means that those two things can sometimes be in tension with each other. But to me, if they're in a head-to-head competition, be kind always wins out. And I do my best not to ever say anything untrue, but I think holding yourself to a standard of like, I'm never going to lie is going against how humans are fundamentally wired. And I don't like setting myself up to fail.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. And where did you come up with these words or this mantra rather? Where did you come up with those specific? I mean, it's a solid mantra. Those are great things to strive for in your life. But like, where and when did you kind of nail those down?
I don't remember the process. I do remember it was a series of things that I know my first husband and I were in lockstep with, because those were values that we wanted to teach to our sons. And I think we've been successful in that. I think they just kind of, they evolved over time. I mean, he and I both were and still are a big, really passionate about being of use, our role as humans, I believe this for myself, is to help other people do other things. And if I see an opportunity to help somebody do something, if I can be of use, if I can put what I know or what I can do to work, then it's my obligation as a human to do that, to be useful. And some of that's in reaction to just seeing people, sit back and wait for stuff or just be entitled and whatever. But I just think it's also a part of a worldview that says, it's, in my mind, I'm definitely kind of a communitarian in that way of, it's our responsibility to be of use. And that's different than helpful, because, to paraphrase, a friend and the real progenitor of this kind of idea, Laura Gassner-Otting, helpful kind of presumes some kind of, I have a thing that you don't, and so therefore, let me help you. There's this little bit of a reach down to lift up kind of thing with a helpfulness. And usefulness to me is, you pick up a tool that's useful. Like that's the other person kind of reaching to you and pulling up. And I much prefer that balance.
Yeah.
But other than those, other than that, I think we just kind of came to those ideas.
Yeah, I love it. And I was just going to say LGO was actually on this podcast a while back. So
of course she was.
Yeah, she's the best. It's interesting. And I think everyone needs a sort of mantra or, I think nailing this down and kind of living by it, mine is just the golden rule of treat people the way you want to be treated, right? Which is what my mom taught me. And, I knew it before I knew it was called the golden rule. And that's something that I've instilled in our kids as well. But I do want to talk about the book, but before we do, I do want to talk a little bit about content marketing and sort of personal branding in a way, because, you are clearly like an expert at this and, I was going through your website before and poking around and, reviewing your YouTube videos and things and your email marketing and all that stuff, Tamsen. And you do such a great job with staying on brand. This is something I've struggled with throughout my life, partly because I think I'm just such a nerd that like blogging and social and everything was more a form of communication, really with the only intention of making friends for me. Like early on, I had jobs and there wasn't an intention for me to use these mediums as ways to build my brand or to build a business, because I was working and I had a paycheck and all these things. So like, tell me a little bit about how you think of content as it applies to your own brand and your own personal brand and building a business from that.
Yeah. So if you could see my face, I was like smirking when you said that I was an expert, because I had to tell you, like, I've spent 25 years in marketing, and that mechanical aspect of it, like the putting the things where they're supposed to go, is not by a little, my least favorite part of marketing. So I have to tell you, like, everything I do is to minimize is all about minimizing how I have to think about it and minimizing the work that I have to do. Which I know probably sounds strange because I know when people look from the outside, they're like, okay, Tamsen, you generate a lot. And I get that. I know there's a newsletter every week. There's a video every other week. But also note how things get multitasked, right? So it's like I record a video, but the video becomes the subject of the newsletter. So I don't have to think about the topic for that particular week. And because I've already figured out how I structure I use my own process of the red thread to figure out what the video is going to be and what I'm going to say. Cause, the new version of it is to do a message in a minute. Well, guess what? You can't do that unless you plan it out ahead of time.
Yeah.
That it actually gives me the outline for the article I'm going to write about it. And so I try to multitask as much as possible, first of all. But I think where it really comes down to is that, there's plenty of people who I'm sure could look at what I do and say, oh, you're not doing X or Y or Z enough. And trust me, people decide to give me that feedback unbidden plenty. They're like, you should sell more to your list, Tamsen, or, you should break it up, or, you should do X, Y, or Z. You should, do whatever to my YouTube videos so that I have a bigger subscriber base there or whatever. And, I think a couple of things come into play. One, remember that I hate this stuff. Number two, I won't do anything that I wouldn't want done to me. And I think that's a really important part. So it's a thing I've referred to in the past as the persuader's paradox. It's particularly rampant among marketers where we somehow convince ourselves that it is okay for us to market and to promote to other people in a way that we are intolerant of being marketed to or promoted to ourselves. And so, frankly, I don't like it when somebody bombards me with sales pitches. I don't like it when every post turns into this was a sale. This was actually a push. I don't like it when someone teases me with a video and then says, okay, but to get the real meat, the actual content, something that's actually useful, you have to go here, go behind a paywall, whatever. I don't like it. I don't like that. And so, back to the golden rule, like I won't market to other people in a way that I wouldn't have them, that I wouldn't want to be marketed to myself. And so I think that comes back to my third point around this, which is I don't really consciously think about my brand. And what I do think about is who I am, what I stand for, why I do what I do the way that I do it. I'm super clear on that. And I'm super clear on how I like my stuff to look, much to the chagrin of the people who edit my videos and my publisher and all of that, which is like, no, it needs to look like X. And thankfully I found a wonderful partner in Michelle Martello, who does my website, who just gets that aesthetic. And that's the thing. I mean, I know what I like. I know what I like things to look like. I know what I like things to sound like. And I don't like, as I was saying before, I just don't like there to be a gap. And so I won't do things that don't feel right to me. I won't say things that don't feel right to me. And so, I think my big dirty secret, no longer a secret, is that, any fun interaction that anybody really sees from me on Instagram is probably is actually not me. Like I don't post, like a lot of the stuff that gets posted on Instagram is posted on my behalf by, Jen, who is the Tamsen Whisperer. She's my director of business operations.
Right.
I'll thank people for posting something and I'll, if someone tags me, I'll reply and all of that. But like anytime you see kind of like some fun story, I still don't understand stories. I just don't. So that's 100% her. So I don't know. I think that's kind of a mishmash of an answer, but really it comes down to I don't worry so much about what other people are going to think. It goes back to the experiences I offer. I always want to make sure that whatever I do feels true to me. That it sounds like me, that it looks like me, that it is consistent with who I see myself to be. And as long as I don't vary off of that, then I'm in good shape. And, it turns out that if you do that consistently enough, which is what I've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years, people end up thinking that you have a great quote unquote brand. But but it really is just the product of my being pretty tenacious about not letting myself do what other people say I should do and really sticking true to what feels true to me.
Mm-hmm. And that exactly, yes, that's a great way to look at it too. Like your personal brand is really you, like, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to think about personal brand if you're sticking to your mantra and you're sticking to the colors and the looks and the styles and all that stuff. And then, outsourcing where you need to. As far as like the content that you do create, you did mention a swipe file. Tell me a little bit about what that process looks like for you.
I love my swipe file. So my swipe file came again from a way to satisfy what I knew was necessary from a presence on social media standpoint, which is, make sure that you're talking about other things, at least in equal amounts, if not more than yourself. That's effortful, not because I'm not inclined to do it, but it was kind of like, oh, God, what the hell do I talk about? Like, I don't know. And I'm busy enough, thankfully, gratefully with client work and other things that I don't have time to just hang out on social all day. And so I needed to be really strategic. I should probably also mention, Dave, that I am fundamentally lazy. And so, I break the rules. Like I post the same thing across different channels. I know you're not supposed to do that, but again, it's like, okay, shoot me. I mean, I just don't have time.
Yeah.
But the swipe file came out of that laziness plus the multitasking plus the be of use piece. So, and it actually really started with, my trying to fix my own, perceived, like things that I didn't feel like I was strong in. So, I would say that I really started the swipe file probably at this point now, 8 or 9 years ago, 8-ish, 9 years ago. And it was inspired by the folks that I knew people, some of whom as well, like my husband, and a former boss, and a former colleague, who were amazing storytellers. They were just, and not just they could tell a story well, they just had the coolest facts and things, and they just knew stuff. And I'm like, well, where did you find this stuff? Because, so I wrote in a recent newsletter, like I went to business school, which may have taught me how to do stuff, but it doesn't teach you how to be interesting. And these were interesting people. And I was like, well, I must not read widely enough. So I really set on this path to say, okay, at the time, I readily read only nonfiction. It was mostly within my area of expertise, so I knew a crap ton about motivation, decision-making, persuasion, and all of that. But I didn't have awesome stories to explain it. And so I started looking for those things. I started looking for things that would be great examples, great illustrations. I started reading, made a dedicated effort to start reading fiction and the classics so that I could pull in a wider variety. So I wasn't always just, quoting Jack Trout and, and Seth Godin or whatever, but I could quote Agatha Christie and I could quote E.M. Forster and I could quote more interesting or more unusual, unexpected people. And so honestly, 8-9 years ago, I set up a bunch of RSS feeds, back when that, Google had that. And then when they stopped, I switched to Feedly and I just kind of ported them all over. And I quickly discovered that I had way more things that I was discovering than I could ever use. And then I was like, oh, well, look at this. I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm going to do this research anyway. But if I share the things that I find onto my social, then I can make sure that I've got a good balance of me being useful and not talking about myself. And it gets me on a social. It gives me a reason to post something. And I'm being useful to other people. And oh, by the way, I'm continuing to expand my own, mental swipe file of things that I can draw from. And I just kind of stuck with it. And because it's fun and it's unexpected. And, but I don't do it because it's unexpected. It is still hugely part of me. I am, if I were an animal, I would be a magpie. I've said that for years now. I think, I used to have it as a kind of joke title on one of my business cards somewhere. It was intellectual magpie. I just love shiny ideas and I just loved kind of gathering all of them all up and figuring out what I could do with them. So that's that's the where, how, why, what, and wherefore of the swipe file.
I love it. And it's such that's a great methodology for that, because I think a lot of people, like for me personally, like I shared so much on social for so long and then started realizing, wait a minute, I'm feeding this social network. Like I'm giving Twitter value. I mean, I'm all for giving followers, friends, value. That's a no-brainer there, of course. But I'm also helping to keep Twitter in business by doing this. And then I realized,
yes.
Wait a minute. And that's when I started the Nice Maker newsletter. It's about a couple years old now, where I share the best links of the things that I find each week. And then maybe I'll post them to social later. But if you're really following me because you enjoy some of the stuff that I share, and I share a lot of your stuff too, because I find it really valuable. I'll do that in my newsletter first. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's awesome.
A quick question to the book, and then let's talk a little bit more or a little bit about the book. You mentioned you're lazy and and as far as like the content side of things and how that's kind of, can cause headaches and things. And then you wrote a book, and I wrote a book, and I know that like Heather had to get me down off the roof from jumping so many times. Not literally, of course. But, writing a book is, a big pain in the ass. There was like,
yes,
it's really, and not to mention the actual compiling and putting it all together and actually the writing, but also the self-doubt and all of that comes with that, which so much so that I actually Googled it when I was writing self-doubt for authors and finding like, oh, wait, everybody goes through this. Tell me a little bit about the process for you, especially, for someone who was, you were talking about how you multitask and how you're able to do multiple things, but yet you're lazy with some of the content stuff. So how did you pull it off?
I pulled it off as I do most things with a system. And I say that I'm lazy, and I think that's true in the sense that I really don't like to waste time on things that are not interesting or important to me. So like my whole life, I've been trying to figure out how can I spend less time on this thing because this thing is way more interesting or important to me. I think when I was 8, 10, however, if I was given the task of unloading the dishwasher, like I can remember like optimizing how I did it because I was like, I am going to minimize the time I have to spend on this dang chore so I can go and, play with my Barbie dolls or whatever. And I continue to do that. And I will tell you that I had a massive, massive writer's block for this, in this book, for years. I think I first started talking about writing this book, like actually seriously talking about writing it like 3 years ago. I spent a year not writing it. I spent another year kind of talking to people about what it should be and why I wasn't writing it. And then, I would say that the person who really helped unlock all this, and full credit to her, was Anne Handley, who, when I was like, all right, Anne, you know me, you know books, you know this, you know what I know, like, what should I do? Like, I'm really frustrated by my inability to actually write this thing because I know this stuff. Like, what the hell? And she said, Tamsen, write the book that's easiest for you to write. And she said, don't worry about the format. She said, don't worry yet about the publisher. She's like, how you're going to get it out there. She's just like, just write the book that you're going to write or that's easiest for you to write. And that really did unjam things in my mind, because instead of wondering and thinking about like, oh my gosh, is this like some beautiful Gladwellian giant tipping point kind of like big idea book? I was like, that was what was getting me tripped up, was like, what do I know that's as big as that? Yeah. And I was like, it just really in a way kind of made me say, well, I know how to write the book on this process. And, you mentioned self-doubt. I know this process works. This process has been tested in the fire of PhDs and scientists and academics and former TED speakers and future TED speakers and all I know it works because it had to work. Like I had to shore up anything that was weak about it. I had to be able to defend every last little part of it. So I knew it. I knew, and I was confident in it. And I was like, and I know the process of explaining it to people and the process of working people through it, because this is, what's it written in the book is literally the same process step by step as I walk my clients through. So when she said that to me, I'm like, well, that I could do. And so that was one piece of it. I think the second piece of it was, finding a system for making it work. And I discovered through, I got the idea, full credit again to AJ Harper, who did this, what she calls it a Write-a-palooza. She does these free things like 4 times a year where it's basically a Zoom call. It's on a Saturday, and from like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern time to like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's basically 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, just write. And I remember I did one of those with her, and I wrote the introduction that I had not been able to get myself to write in a year. And I was like, oh, well, look at this. This seems to work. This idea of sprints, which I'm familiar with other parts of my work. I already used Pomodoro blocks, time blocking like that. Anyway. And I was like, and this extra thing about having somebody else on like in the room also made a big difference. And so between that and David Burkus had done a thing kind of at 11 a.m. on certain days where he was doing the same thing, opened up a Zoom room. And I was like, okay, I can't do 11, but you know what? 9 a.m., that works for me. So I set up a Zoom room. I set up a URL to it, and to, clients and friends that I knew were working on books. I was like, hey, I'm going to be here at 9 o'clock every weekday. I'm going to work for at least 20 minutes. I'm going to always do at least one sprint on the book. Join me if you want. And what I just found was, that commitment to myself of doing at least 20 minutes and knowing that somebody else might be coming because it would be helpful to them was enough to make sure that I was always there. And starting probably, across the pandemic last year is really, I'd say when it happened, I was just 20 minutes every day at least, and, got a chapter done every 2 weeks, and I was able to turn in the manuscript in August or September as a result.
That's brilliant. I remember LGO actually mentions that, and I believe she might have done that with Burkus as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is a great way to do that. So, and you talked about reading fiction and kind of pulling ideas from that fiction and letting that fiction sort of, topics and stories within fiction inspire you in the content you've created. And you've done a great job with tying in different objects, different things from literature and things into the content that you create. And I think it does really show the value in reading fiction. Not that I have to tell everyone the value of reading fiction, but in that context, tell me about the red thread as the red thread and not the black thread or not the straight line or whatever. How did the red line, and I love the red thread. I mean,
yeah.
I love that idea. I mean, nobody can not imagine red thread. So it's, did that come from fiction or something else?
So that was kind of my magpie stuff working in full force. So, I think I first heard the expression in the sense that I use it in the book as meaning, what's the thing that makes something make sense? What's the through line? What is this thing about? I first heard that probably again 8 or 9 years ago, when I was working for a company called Oratium, and one of our clients was Ericsson in Sweden. And I was over there doing training with them on message development. And one of the clients used it in a conversation, and they're like, oh, okay. So what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to establish the red thread of this particular presentation. And I understood contextually exactly what it was, but I was like, and I just noted it. I'm like, that's an interesting expression. I love it. It's very visual. You kind of immediately get it. You get the idea. But I thought it actually belonged to Ericsson. I thought it was just a corporate thing, one of those things where, they come up with it. And then about 5 years ago, I guess it would have to have been about 5 years ago, I had another client here locally in town in Boston, at State Street Bank, and they had brought in, like, one of the people on the team was originally from Sweden. And she used it too. And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, okay, either you used to work for Ericsson or this is a Swedish thing. And she was like, oh, don't you all have that expression over here? And I was like, no, not really. I said, I get what it means, but I was like, where does it come from? And so she didn't actually know. And so that turned on my inner magpie, and I went searching for its root, discovered that there are all sorts of red threads. There's a red thread in Eastern philosophy that talks about tying together two soulmates or two people who are meant to be together. There's a red thread, Goethe talks about the red thread, in the context of something that's, really known as the rogue's yarn. So it's a red thread that was woven into the ropes of British naval ships to identify that rope as belonging to the British Royal Navy. And then, but there's red threads in the Bible. There's lots of red threads, but this red thread, the Swedish one, seems to have come from the Greek myth legend of Theseus, the Minotaur, and the Labyrinth. And the red thread was, a tool given to him by Ariadne, a woman who he ultimately completely dicked over, by the way, who gave him the thread as a way to trace his path through this maze, this labyrinth that nobody had previously been able to escape. And so, I just love that. I love that particular interpretation because it made so much sense in the context. You're basically, it's the how do you find the connection? How do you find your path? How do you find how you got to a place? How do you lead someone else there? And I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Let me interject here because it's making me think Sweden straight away. I think of IKEA, right? And then I think about getting lost in IKEA. Next time I go to an IKEA, I'm bringing a red thread to find my way out.
Right. Except for the fact that it's organized it's organized like a labyrinth. Like you just follow the arrows. They should be red.
They totally should be. Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. So I had, stored away in my mental swipe file was this phrase, the red thread was the story behind it. And then separately, I had this IP, this process that I developed for TEDx Cambridge, that was were these 5 elements of what eventually came to be known as goal, problem, truth, change, action, the 5 pieces that I talk about in the book. But it didn't have a name. And I'd spent a lot, enough years in marketing to realize that I couldn't just call it the goal, problem, truth, change, action model. But I was at a dinner with, some folks that you and I both know, Neen James, Joey Coleman, Clay Hebert, and I said, hey, I need a name for this thing. And what do you think of the red thread? And that's when it was born.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. And all wonderful people too. So, that's super cool. So in the red thread, you wrote the biggest obstacle to inspiring your audience to act is the gap between what you want to say about your idea and what people need to hear about it. So how can you fill that gap?
Well, you fill that gap with what people's brains put in that gap anyway, which is a rationalization, an explanation, or, more common parlance, a story. We do this all the time. We do it preconsciously. We see 2 things happen and we make assumptions based on how other things, patterns of what we've seen prior in the world to explain why it is that, things operate the way that they do. We essentially tell ourselves stories about why the world works the way it does, why people behave the way they behave, why we behave the way that we behave. And so when it comes to sharing your idea with someone else and with getting them to act on that, they have to hear, before they'll act on it, they have to hear enough of a story that makes sense to them for them to first understand the idea and then fundamentally to agree with it and then act on it. Because all of those pieces have to happen before they'll act. They have to understand what you're saying. They have to agree with it before they'll act on it. And so what you're filling that gap with is the pieces of that story that people's brains would build anyway. You're supplying that story. And ideally, you're supplying a stronger story than the one that they would otherwise build on their own.
Love it. Okay. And I wanted to ask you also about the duck bunny analogy, but I think, do you want to talk about that briefly? And then I'm going to hit the lightning round and then we will wrap up because I know you got a hard stop.
Yeah, the duck bunny is turning out to be people's favorite thing about the book. It's the chapter that seems to resonate the most with folks. The duck bunny is the mascot, in a lot of ways, for a really important piece of your message. And that's at a moment in your message where you are drawing a contrast between how your audience currently sees a situation and how you see it. And the duck bunny serves as a really important mascot because it embodies certain things that are really important when you're drawing that kind of contrast. So the duck bunny itself refers to another thing that I found, through my swipe file research, an optical illusion from 1897, I think it is, where if you see it, it is, depending on how you look at it, it either looks like a duck or it looks like a rabbit. So it's the rabbit-duck illusion. I prefer to call it the duck bunny. But what's really important about how it embodies this idea of creating this contrast is that, first, no matter which animal you see first, you're correct. If you see the duck first, you're right. If you see the bunny first, you're right. And so this is a really important piece of drawing this contrast, which is that you are validating how someone sees the world right now. The second piece is that once you can indicate that there is a second view, that somebody can easily agree with you that other thing is there. Another important thing when you're drawing contrast, you're not saying, hey, the way that you're looking at the world is wrong and my way is right. You're saying, hey, I understand why you see the world the way that you do. Do you also see this view? Right. And again, you're not trying to argue for it. You're just trying to find another. Would you agree that there is also a rabbit present in the image?
Right.
And the third thing that's really important about that duck bunny and capturing how you draw a contrast between kind of current state and future state is that you haven't had to do anything at all to the picture. I mean, I love it, so you can switch back and forth between the duck and the bunny, but I haven't added any new lines to that picture. And that's really important when you're trying to get somebody to see things in a new way. The hardest thing to do, again, remember, I'm lazy, is to try to get them to look at an entirely different place. Like say, stop looking at this picture, look over here.
Right.
It's way easier to get them to simply shift their focus, shift their attention, shift the lens or the perspective they're using on their current view, than anything else. And so, the duck bunny is the mascot, for finding that contrast. And it's about finding their current perspective, the duck, as I like to call it, the new perspective, the bunny, and then presenting both of those in a way that people really see the difference and the agreement and the relationship between the two.
And if you want to do the opposite, you could be really aggressive and argue in the wabbit season, duck season, method instead.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's right.
Classic right. Looney Tunes,
Classic.
folks. All right.
Right.
Okay. I know you got to wrap up, so I'm going to do the quick lightning round. So, nice guys and gals finish.
Oh, first.
What's a nice book you recommend to the nice makers listening?
Nice book to recommend to the listener. I will recommend the book I almost recommend no matter when anybody asks for book or author's recommendations, which is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Because the more you understand how people's brains work, the kinder and the more useful you can be.
Excellent. How is Tamsen Webster nice to herself?
Oh, she buys herself Diane von Furstenberg dresses when she has saved the money for them. I
think you are probably my best dressed friend.
It's just, again, it saves me effort. That's what I'm telling you. It's laziness. I mean, I love the way those dresses look. I love how they feel, but it also means it's another thing I don't have to think about. It's like when I want to indulge, I don't have to go shopping all over the place. I just say, what does DVF have right now? And I'm going to get that.
I think many speakers kick themselves so they didn't go the Mitch Joel route and just buy black outfits. For cause I love that. I mean, personally, from my point of view, I love that idea of not having to think of what to wear.
And I think whatever your uniform is, it's really practical. And here's the thing. Like I said, I am super consistent. I love patterns. I literally love patterns. I love them visually. I love them in ideas. And so one of the things I love about DVF dresses is that they are wonderful patterns. So it allows me to kind of show on the outside the things that I love on the inside.
I love it. All right. If you had a billboard, what would it say?
Be useful, be thoughtful, be passionate, be kind.
I love it, Tamsen. Thank you so much for joining us today. How can people find you? Where can they find you?
I am literally the only Tamsen Webster in the universe, so it's not hard. But TamsenWebster.com is the home of all things Tamsen, newsletter included.
And I highly recommend folks subscribe to that, subscribe to your YouTube channel as well. And of course, buy the book, The Red Thread, which is, it's absolutely brilliant. And I love it. And Tamsen, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thanks for listening to the Nice Podcast. I would love to include your voice on the show. If you have comments or questions regarding this episode or any episode, whether you might have some nice communications tips of your own, visit friend.nicepodcast.co. There, you can record an audio comment, and I expect you'll hear it on an upcoming episode. Theme song is Little Jane May, and the end song is Funny Feeling by Alistair Crystal at alistaircrystal.ca. And we'll see you next time. Be nice.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Sarah Panus hosts a great podcast called Marketing with Empathy. Sarah, tell us what these fine folks will get when they listen.
Marketing with Empathy is a weekly podcast, and it's designed for brand content marketers who want to connect with their audiences through storytelling and are looking for help to do it better, plus enjoy that recognition, growth, and just joy that comes from creating great work.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Yeah, head on over to marketingpodcast.net and you will see the Marketing with Empathy show there. Otherwise, wherever you listen to podcasts, you'll find Marketing with Empathy.
You heard her. Go subscribe.